I leaned in, close enough for the crystal to rattle, and whispered, "Your wife beat me." My father's knife never paused. The carving fork held the roast, as if nothing in this room could bleed. Someone laughed. Someone dropped a fork, and Delia's smile cracked like ice under a boot. "My name is Rowan Hale. I am 33 years old. I am also, apparently, invisible, until I choose not to be. Tonight, I chose not to be. Christmas Eve at Northcrest is not a holiday. It is a judgment. It is the annual performance review for the Hale family, and Delia is the CEO. The dining room in my father's Vermont home is her stage. It is suffocatingly perfect. The air is thick with the competing scents of pine resin from the towering tree in the foyer, the heavy, savory perfume of the standing rib roast, and the sharp, floral dominance of Delia's perfume. It smells like ambition and denial. The room is gleaming, antique silver, polished to a painful brightness, sits beside crystal so fine it seems to vibrate with the unsaid words in the room. The candlelight catches everything, refracts it, makes the whole scene look like it's underwater. We are all trapped in a beautiful, cold aquarium. I entered exactly 7 minutes after the guests were meant to be seated. Late enough to make an entrance, not so late as to be accused of rudeness. A white cashmere shawl was draped over my shoulders. It was soft, insulating, but it felt like armor. I had practiced the precise degree of nonchalance in the car. Delia was by the fireplace, her laugh tinkling like the tiny crystal bells on the mantelpiece. She is a woman who manufactures joy. Her smiles are structural, designed to bear the weight of all the family's secrets. When she saw me, the smile widened, became something laminated and waterproof. "Rowan, darling," she cooed, gliding toward me. "We were so worried. The roads, the snow." "The roads are perfectly clear." "Delia," I said. My voice was calm, pitched to carry over the polite murmur. I let her kiss the air near my cheek. At the head of the long baronial table, my father, Victor Hale, was already standing. He was performing his one vital role in these proceedings. He was preparing to carve the meat. His hands, large and capable, rested on the antique silver-handled knife and the matching long-tined fork. He glanced up as I entered, a single, economical nod. Acknowledgement given, duty done. He returned his gaze to the roast. Victor is a man who believes deeply in ritual, in the sacred, predictable separation of flesh from bone. It is, I suspect, the only time he feels truly in control. The guests were the same audience they had been for a decade. Victor's business partners, smiling men with cold eyes, their wives, thin and watchful, draped in expensive, muted silks, a few distant cousins, the ones who had sided with Delia after the divorce because her invitations were better, and Dr. and Mrs. Albright, the neighbors who had known me since I was a child, and who had, over 20 years, perfected the art of looking politely away. They were all here for the show, the annual pageant of Hale family harmony. I moved toward my assigned seat, a strategic placement halfway down the table, equidistant from power and the exit. The silk cuff of my blouse brushed against the skin of my left wrist. I resisted the automatic impulse to rub it. Under the silk, the scar was a pale, thin, silvery line. It was barely visible, but I felt it. It burned. It was not a relic of some clumsy childhood accident. It was from last Christmas. I was 32 years old. We had been on the slate patio, the air so cold it cracked. Delia had been criticizing my contribution to the silent auction she chaired. Her voice, usually so full of sugar, had dropped to gravel. "You always do the minimum, Rowan, just enough to be seen, never enough to actually help." My company donated $5,000. "Delia," I had said, my voice tight. "We needed 10. Sloane's fiancé got his firm to donate 12. "Then Sloane wins. I'm going inside." I had turned to go, and she grabbed me, her fingers, made strong from decades of pruning roses and gripping her own ambition, closed around my forearm, her nails, filed to perfect ovals, dug in. It was not a stumble, it was an assault. "You will not walk away from me," she hissed. The shock of it, the sheer physical violation, here, as an adult, had frozen me. I ripped my arm back. When I looked down, 4 perfect crescent moons were weeping tiny beads of blood onto my skin. My father had been standing just inside the sliding glass door. He wasn't looking at us. He was watching the snow fall on the hemlocks. He heard my sharp intake of breath. He must have. He saw me cradle my arm as I pushed past him into the warmth of the house. He said nothing. Later, hours later, when I was washing the wound in the guest bathroom, he knocked softly. "Rowan?" He didn't open the door. Delia is under a great deal of pressure this time of year. She gets agitated. Let's not make a fuss. A fuss. His word for violence. His word for pain. His word for anything that threatened to scratch the perfect veneer of his life. Now, a year later, I took my seat. The white shawl settled around my shoulders. I felt the scar throb. The polite murmuring died down. The staff finished pouring the wine. Delia, back at her seat opposite Victor, raised her champagne flute. She tapped it gently with a fingernail. The clear, crystalline ring demanded silence. "A toast," she began. Her voice was pure honey, poured generously over the entire table. "To another beautiful year, together, to family, the ones we are born with and the ones we are lucky enough to gain." She smiled at Sloane, her daughter, who sat at Victor's right. "To kinship." Her eyes found mine, a brief, glittering challenge across the expanse of silver and crystal. "And to harmony," she concluded. "May we always, always find our way back to it." The chorus of assent, harmony, to family, here, here. They all raised their glasses. I raised mine. Delia, in a gesture of magnanimous hospitality, began to circle the table, wishing individuals a Merry Christmas. She was a queen visiting her subjects. Her path brought her, inevitably, to me. She was a cloud of Chanel No. 5 in triumph. She leaned close, her own glass still raised slightly, a public gesture of inclusion, of forgiveness for my unspoken sins. I turned my head. Our champagne flutes clinked. The sound was sharp, brittle, too high. It sounded like something breaking. I looked directly into her eyes, pupils slightly pinned from the wine, radiating satisfaction. "Tonight," I whispered. My voice was a thread of ice, so low only she could hear it. The words barely vibrated the air between our lips. "We tell the truth." Delia's smile did not falter. It was a muscular reflex, too well trained. But the light in her eyes went out. It was a shutter click, a door slamming shut. The warmth was gone, replaced by a flat, cold assessment. She straightened up without a word. The perfect hostess. She glided back to her seat, the moment absorbed, dismissed. But the air in the room had changed. It had been rarefied. Now it was pressurized. The heat from the massive fireplace suddenly felt stifling. The pristine white linen tablecloth, ironed to a perfect smoothness, seemed to tighten, pulling flat, exposing the hard, unforgiving wood underneath. It was no longer a dinner table, it was an operating theater, and the curtain was up. I let the silence stretch. I watched my father. He lifted the heavy carving knife, testing its weight. He settled the long fork deep into the roast. The first incision. I stood up. Every head turned. My chair, on the thick Persian rug, made no sound, but the collective intake of breath was audible. Sloane, my stepsister, looked confused. Delia's eyes were narrow, fixed on me. I walked the length of the table. My heels were silent on the rug. I walked past the Albrights, who suddenly found their bread plates fascinating. I walked past Victor's partners, who looked annoyed at the interruption. I walked past my cousins, who looked terrified. The only sound in the room was the knife, the wet, soft, rhythmic sound of the blade moving through the expensive, perfectly cooked meat. Slice, slice, slice. I walked toward my father, toward Victor. He did not look up. His focus on his task was absolute. He was a surgeon, a craftsman, a man performing a sacred duty, or he was a coward, hiding behind the only ritual that had ever mattered to him. I stopped when my hip was level with his elbow, when I was standing in the empty space between him and his favored daughter. Delia's voice, sharp and high. "Rowan, what are you doing? Sit down. Your father is carving." I ignored her. I leaned in. I leaned close enough to smell the rosemary and garlic on the crust of the meat. Close enough for the faint, uncontrollable tremor in my hand to brush the sleeve of his expensive wool blazer. Close enough for the vibration of my voice to rattle the crystal water glass by his plate. A tiny, discordant chime that cut through the silence. I spoke into the space just behind his ear. My voice was not a whisper. It was quiet, but it was clear and cold and precise. "Your wife beat me." The words hung in the air. Terrible, simple, true. My father's hand did not stop. The knife never paused. The long carving fork held the roast steady, its tines plunged deep, as if nothing in this perfectly lit, perfectly warm, perfectly civilized room could possibly bleed. He continued to slice, thin, perfect, ruby-red slices of meat, falling away onto the silver platter. But the table had heard. Someone gasped. Mrs. Albright, our neighbor, let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh, a sound of pure, terrified nervousness, and immediately clapped a hand over her mouth. From the other end of the table, a sound like a gunshot. A guest, one of the partners, had dropped his heavy silver fork. It hit the bone china plate with a clatter that echoed in the sudden, absolute vacuum of sound. An unbearable, suffocating silence descended. It pressed down on the room, smothering the candlelight. I looked across the table, past my father's oblivious, focused head. Delia, her smile, the one she had held in place since I first spoke to her, cracked. It shattered. It fractured like thin ice under a heavy boot, the pieces of her composure collapsing inward. Her face was a mask of white rage. My father kept carving, slice, 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 a ritual of denial, a desperate, pathological commitment to normalcy. But it was too late. The guests were frozen. They were statues. Napkins were clutched halfway to laps. Wine glasses were poised in midair. They were trapped. They were no longer guests. They were an audience. The game, my game, had finally begun. The silence in the dining room stretched, becoming a physical thing. It was a thick, heavy blanket, the same one Delia had used to smother my childhood. This silence was not new. It was the airspace I had been raised in. It was the sound of my father, Victor, choosing peace over truth. My mother left when I was 6. The divorce was quiet, civilized. My father retained the house, the status, and me, for almost a year. Northcrest was just the echo of his footsteps on the hardwood floors and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. It was a quiet, neutral space. Then Delia arrived. She did not enter our lives. She colonized them. She arrived with a cloud of expensive perfume and a container truck full of furniture in shades of beige and gold. And she brought Sloane. Sloane was 7, 1 year my senior, a doll made of blonde curls, pink cashmere, and a quiet, watchful compliance. Delia was a whirlwind of social reorganization. She changed the curtains, the carpets, and the gravitational center of the household. My father, a man who loathed disruption, seemed relieved. Delia managed everything. She managed the staff, the social calendar, and most efficiently, she managed me. The management was subtle at first. It was an administration of 1,000 tiny cuts, a campaign waged with physical objects. Holidays, which had once been simple affairs with my father, became elaborate productions. Christmas was Delia's masterpiece, the first Christmas after she and Victor were married. The living room was buried in gifts. It was a mountain of conspicuous consumption, but the mountain was not evenly distributed. Sloane's presents were a fortress, all wrapped in opulent, thick, glittering gold foil, bound with wired velvet ribbons. She tore them open with practiced excitement. revealing imported porcelain dolls, silk riding outfits, a miniature pearl necklace. My gifts were segregated to a small, shadowy corner by the fireplace. They were wrapped in the thin, cheap, forest green paper from the drugstore, the kind that tore if you looked at it too hard. I opened them. A multi-pack of blue ballpoint pens, a stack of lined notebooks, a 3-pack of gray wool socks. "We must remember to encourage Rowan's practical side," Delia announced to the room, sipping her morning champagne. "Sloane is the artist, but Rowan is so sensible." My father, reading the instruction manual for Sloane's new telescope, just nodded. "Very sensible." I was 9 years old. I had asked for a dollhouse. The most precise and brutal edit came 2 years later. We took a family ski trip to Maple Crest Lodge. Delia insisted on a photograph. It was the 4 of us, standing in front of the massive fieldstone fireplace, all wearing the itchy, matching burgundy sweaters she had ordered from a catalog. I was standing on the end, next to my father. Weeks later, the photo appeared, enshrined in a heavy, ornate silver frame on the mantelpiece. It was a masterpiece of composition. Delia, radiant. In the center, Sloane, adorable. Next to her, my father, looking vaguely pleased. On the other side, and next to my father, an inexplicable sliver of burgundy fabric. My shoulder. My entire head, my body, my presence had been physically cropped out of the frame. "It just looked so much more balanced this way," Delia explained to a visiting neighbor, gesturing with her wine glass. "The composition was cluttered. Now, it's perfect. Just the family." I studied that frame for an hour. My shoulder was the only part of me that had made the cut. I was clutter. I was the visual noise that had to be removed to make the picture perfect. I turned my focus inward. If I could not be seen, I would be heard, or at least read. I became a perfect student. I devoured books. I won the county spelling bee. I aced every exam. I made the high honor roll every single semester for 6 straight years. But my achievements were never my own. They were immediately absorbed and reallocated by the family corporation. "Rowan is just thriving," Delia would tell her friends over bridge. "It's been such a blessing. Having Sloane in the house, it's given Rowan someone to look up to, a positive influence to strive for." Sloane, who found reading tiring and consistently struggled with algebra, would just smile her sweet, vague smile. The narrative was set in stone. Sloane was the muse. I was just the hard-working, practical drone who benefited from her angelic presence. The true breaking point, or perhaps the true moment of clarity, happened in my sophomore year of high school. I had poured every ounce of my disciplined anger into the violin. I practiced until my fingers were ridged and bleeding. I made first chair in the regional youth orchestra. It was a position of undeniable merit. I had a small, complex solo in the winter concert. The night of the performance, the auditorium was packed. I remember the smell of rosin and floor wax. I played my solo. It was clean, sharp, and passionate. I hit every note. When I finished, there was a solid, respectful wave of applause. I felt, for a moment, a flicker of genuine pride. Then came the ensemble piece. Sloane, naturally, was also in the orchestra. Delia had insisted she play the flute, declaring it such a ladylike instrument. Sloane was buried in the 3rd row of the woodwinds. Halfway through a difficult passage, she lost her place. She came in 3 beats early, emitting a loud, panicked, shriek key that echoed through the silent hall. It was a catastrophic error. Sloane turned a vivid, mortified crimson and fumbled her instrument, nearly dropping it. After the concert, I packed my violin, my mind still humming with the music. With the small, solid victory of my solo, I walked out into the lobby. I was met with a wall of backs. My father, Delia, and even my Aunt Marigold were huddled in a tight, protective circle around Sloane, who was weeping with dramatic, gulping sobs. "It was nothing, darling, nothing," Delia was cooing, smoothing Sloane's hair. No one even noticed. "You were so brave to just keep going," my father added, rubbing her back. That's what counts. Real character. I stood there, holding the black, coffin-shaped violin case. I was invisible. My flawless performance, the product of 1,000 hours of work, had not happened. The only event of the evening was Sloane's spectacular, noisy failure. My success was silent, but her failure required the immediate deployment of the entire family's emotional and narrative resources. In the car, the silence was thick with Sloane's sniffles. "My solo went well," I said quietly, staring out the window at the snow. My father sighed. It was the sigh I knew better than his laugh. It was the sound of my existence becoming an administrative burden. "Rowan, please," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Sloane is very upset. She's a sensitive girl. Let's not make a big deal out of it. Let's just have a peaceful night. Don't make a scene. Don't make a fuss. Don't make things difficult." My pain was a scene. My accomplishments were a big deal. My request for a single word of acknowledgement was difficult. I was the disturbance. I was the rock in the road that my father was perpetually tired of driving around. He was not a father. He was a conflict manager, and his primary client was Delia. From then on, Delia was the undisputed director of all family holidays. She treated them like film sets, and she was the auteur. She scripted everything. Christmas photos became an agonizing ritual of hierarchical placement. "Sloane, darling, right here by the fire. The light loves you. Victor, stand behind her, arm around her shoulder. Yes, perfect. Rowan, can you stand in the back? By the doorway. You're casting a shadow. No, a little more to the left. You know what? It's just too crowded. Rowan, be a love and just take the picture for us. Will you? The angle is so much better from over there." One Thanksgiving, when I was 17, I finally understood. I stood where she directed, holding the heavy 35mm camera. I looked through the viewfinder. Victor, Delia, Sloane, all posed perfectly by the fireplace, smiling. The large, comfortable armchair next to Sloane, my designated seat, was conspicuously empty. "Smile," I called out, my voice flat. "Oh, this is wonderful," Delia said. Her gaze locked on the lens. "So cozy." I clicked the shutter. I was the photographer of my own erasure. I was the official archivist of the family I was not permitted to be in. I stopped fighting for a place in the photograph. I stopped asking for permission to exist. I put all my emotions in a locked drawer. Silence became my armor. If I was invisible, I could watch, and if I watched, I could learn. I began to collect evidence. Not out of sentiment, out of necessity. I started a box. In went the thin green wrapping paper. In went the program from the orchestra recital. In went the drugstore receipt for my gray socks, dated the same day as the credit card slip for Sloane's pearl necklace. And one day, cleaning out Delia's fussy antique desk, I found a small envelope. Inside was the cropped portion of the Maple Crest Lodge photo. My face, smiling, severed from my body. I took it. It was the prize of my collection. There was no open warfare. Delia was too smart for that. There was no shouting, no dramatic abuse. That would have been a scene, and Victor would have been forced to act. No, her method was clean, quiet, and relentless. It was the systematic, bureaucratic exclusion of a person from her own life. It was the steady, polite, and constant whisper that I did not belong. I learned my lesson, standing in that living room, looking at the empty chair. They will never give you a seat at their table. They will crop you out for balance. They will ask you to take the picture. If you want a seat, you have to stop asking. You have to build your own table, and then you have to decide when to flip theirs. I left Vermont the August after I turned 18. I did not pack the gray wool socks or the ballpoint pens. I packed my savings from a summer job, my high school transcripts, and the small, cropped-out photo of my own face. I flew 5 hours and 45 minutes across the continent, putting 2 mountain ranges and the entire Great Plains between me and Northcrest. I did not look back. I chose a school on the West Coast, one known for engineering, not lineage. And I chose a major that was the perfect antidote to Delia's household: systems design. My family's structure was illogical. It was a system built on arbitrary rules, emotional manipulation, and a complete disregard for data. Achievements were inputs that produced no output. Needs were variables that were consistently ignored. The entire architecture was flawed, designed to support only two users, Delia and Sloan. Systems design was the opposite. It was the study of logic, of flow, of efficiency. It was about inputs and outputs. It was about identifying bottlenecks and eliminating them. It was the study of making things make sense. I went to California to learn how to build unbreakable systems. The idea for Asterline was born not in a moment of inspiration, but in a moment of pure, logical frustration. I was in a hospital waiting room, visiting a friend who had broken her leg. I sat there for 3 hours, watching a nurse on the phone. Her face was tight. Her voice was strained. She was trying to locate a specific surgical tray for a procedure. She was bounced from a supplier to a distributor, put on hold, and told to check a paper catalog. A patient was waiting. A surgeon was waiting. The system was broken. It was inefficient. It was dangerous. I sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair and, on the back of an envelope, I sketched out the architecture, a real-time, unified platform to track medical supplies from the factory to the operating room. No more phone calls, no more paper catalogs, just a clean dashboard showing exactly where everything was. I called it Asterline, after the network of stars, the lines that sailors use to navigate. I started it in my junior year. My headquarters was a 9 by 12-foot bedroom in a rundown apartment 4 blocks from campus. The rent was $800 a month. I paid for it by working 2 jobs, from 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. I was a junior coder for a bland database management company, from 6 until midnight. I served overpriced lattes to stressed-out graduate students at the campus library. In between, from midnight until 4 in the morning, I built Asterline. My life was a loop of code, caffeine, and exhaustion. My diet consisted of instant ramen, microwaved coffee, and the stale pastries I was allowed to take home from the library. My only furniture was a mattress on the floor and a second-hand desk crammed against the wall. The room was always stiflingly hot, filled with the constant, high-pitched hum of the 3 second-hand servers I ran under the desk. This was not a hardship. It was an incubation. I was walled in by my own ambition. In that hot, cramped room, I was the architect. I was the one who set the rules. Delia's perfectly set tables and passive-aggressive toasts could not reach me here. My father's heavy, disappointed silence could not penetrate the whine of the cooling fans. I was building my own table, and it was a server rack. I convinced 3 other students to join me, 2 coders and a business student. We were fueled by cheap pizza and the arrogant belief that we could fix a multi-billion-dollar industry. We pooled our part-time pay, about $5,000, to pay for server space. We built the first beta. We convinced a small, local hospital, the same one where I had the initial idea, to let us run a trial. The trial lasted 24 hours. It was a catastrophe. A data entry error in our intake module, a single misplaced line of code, cascaded through their entire system. It did not just fail to track their inventory. It corrupted their existing database. We didn't just fail to solve their problem. We became their biggest one. The hospital administrator, a woman who had believed in us, told me, her voice shaking with rage, to get our toxic experiment out of her hospital. The team evaporated. Sarah, our best back-end coder, got an offer from Google. Ben and Raj went back to their PhDs. They were polite. They were apologetic. They had student loans to think about. They did not have the luxury of my single-minded, scorched earth obsession. I was alone again, sitting on the floor of my apartment, staring at a screen full of failed code and angry emails. I bit down so hard on the inside of my cheek, I tasted the metallic tang of blood. I did not cry. Crying was a fuss. Crying was making a big deal. Instead, I opened the command terminal. I typed the command to delete the entire corrupted branch. I deleted 6 months of work, and I started over. From scratch. Alone. I rebuilt Asterline from the ground up. I made it stronger, faster, and simpler. I built in triple redundancies. I coded until my vision blurred and the green text on my black screen became a meaningless smear. 6 months later, the world broke. The crisis hit, the global supply chain. A system I had studied as a theoretical problem snapped like a dry twig. It was not theoretical anymore. It was the screaming, red banner headline on every news channel. Trucks stopped moving, ships sat anchored in ports, and hospitals, the very places that needed the system to work, began to run out of everything: masks, gowns, ventilators, basic, essential supplies vanished. My phone rang at 3 a.m. It was a man I had never met, an administrator for a hospital network in the Great Plains. He had found my name on a 9-month-old list of entrants from a failed startup competition. His voice was raw, stripped of all pleasantries. "I run 55 hospitals across 3 states," he said, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "I do not know where our next shipment of oxygen canisters is. I have been told, logistics. I have patients in respiratory distress. I heard you had an idea about logistics. Can you help me? I need a yes or a no." "Yes," I said. Asterline was not ready. It was not perfect, but it was functional. I worked for 72 hours straight, fueled by nothing but adrenaline and stale coffee. I integrated with their logistics partners. I bypassed the distributor-level data, which was useless, and coded a solution to ping the GPS trackers on the delivery trucks themselves. I built a new dashboard, a live map. It was not beautiful, it was essential. It was a map of the American Midwest. Green dots were hospitals, blue lines were truck routes, and red, pulsing exclamation points were critical shortages. I watched the data populate. I saw a truck carrying ventilators sitting idle in a depot in Chicago. I saw a hospital in rural Kansas with 2 hours of oxygen left. I made a phone call. I rerouted the truck. On my screen, I watched the blue line change course. I watched the red exclamation point over the Kansas hospital turn yellow, indicating the shipment was en route. 4 hours later, it turned green. I leaned back in my chair. My hands were shaking. I had not just built a system. I had not just optimized a route. I had, in a direct, tangible, and logical way, saved a life. That one contract in the plains was the first domino. We were not a theoretical startup anymore. We were an essential service. The hospital network signed a 1-year contract. I used the money to hire a real team. Not students, but engineers who had been laid off from other tech companies. We rebuilt Asterline 2.0. We went looking for venture capital. We did not go with a PowerPoint and a hopeful plea. We walked into the glass-walled conference rooms of Sand Hill Road and put a laptop on the table. We showed them the map. We showed them the live feed of PPE, ventilators, and oxygen canisters moving from warehouses to hospital bedsides. We showed them the green dots. We did not ask for money. We told them what we needed to scale. The funding round closed in a week, $10 million. My name, Rowan Hale, was suddenly in business journals. 30 under 30, the logistical savior, the woman who fixed the supply chain. My father called. I was in the middle of a server migration, but I saw his name and I stepped out. That stupid, vestigial hope fluttered in my chest. "Rowan," he said. His voice was distant, neutral. "I saw that article. Good. It seems like you're taking care of yourself, keeping busy." I closed my eyes. "I'm managing a team of 20. Dad," I said, my voice quiet. "We're coordinating logistics for over 300 hospitals now. We're making a difference." "That's nice," he said. There was a pause, and then his voice changed. It warmed up. It filled with genuine, unmistakable pride. "Did I tell you Sloan is doing wonderfully? She just got a major promotion. She's going to be managing events for the new Four Seasons in Boston, big galas, charity balls. She's really found her calling. We're so proud of her. I was routing trucks full of life-saving equipment to dying patients. Sloan was planning parties, and he was proud of her. That's great, Dad, I said. My voice was flat, cold, and clear. I have to go. I hung up. I visited Northcrest for Thanksgiving that year, obligated by the performance of family. I was the CEO of a company valued at $80 million. I brought an expensive, appropriate hostess gift. Delia kissed the air near my cheek. Rowan, you look thin, she said, her eyes scanning me. It's good you're so busy. It keeps you out of trouble. I watched her place the framed article I had brought for my father face down on a side table, covering it with a stack of coasters. I stayed at Asterline for 2 more years. We stabilized the system. We made it robust. We expanded to 3 continents. And then, when the crisis had ebbed, when the system was no longer a frantic emergency response but a stable, permanent piece of infrastructure, I sold it. The press release was quiet. The deal was substantial. I did not buy a penthouse in New York or a car that cost more than a house. I walked away with one, single, invaluable thing: freedom, absolute, untethered, financial freedom. I started over. I built a new table. I created a small, quiet investment fund. We invest in one thing and one thing only: female founders. Women with brilliant ideas who are told by men in suits that they are too aggressive or not a team player. Women who are told to stand in the back of the photograph. I built my own professional family. We are logical. We are supportive. We do not compete. We collaborate. We share our successes. And I learned, for the first time, to be still. I learned to use my hands for things other than a keyboard. I learned to cook. Not the elaborate, performative meals Delia created for an audience, but simple, nourishing food. Bread that required kneading, sauces that required time. I took a pottery class. I sat at the wheel, my hands covered in wet, gray clay. I learned to center it. The instructor told me it was about firm, consistent pressure, not anger, not force, just presence. The feeling of the wet earth spinning, responding to the slightest, most confident touch. It was the opposite of my childhood. It was a system I could control. It was an object that, with focus and intent, I could shape into something whole. I was remeasuring the very concept of belonging. It was not something you were given. It was something you built. I met Elias Ward at a pottery studio. He was a constitutional lawyer who was trying, and failing, to make a symmetrical mug. He was patient, funny, and had the quietest confidence of anyone I had ever known. He was not impressed by the 8-figure valuation of my company. He was impressed that I could, after 3 weeks of trying, throw a perfectly centered bowl. He saw the person, not the balance sheet. He saw the hands covered in clay, not the CEO. Our life together was built on small, tangible things: the smell of coffee in the morning, the weight of a well-made book, the shared silence of reading in the same room. We built a home that was the antithesis of Northcrest. It was warm, functional, and honest. He proposed on a Tuesday night. It was 9 o'clock. We were in the kitchen, attempting to make pasta from scratch for the first time. The room was a disaster zone. A fine white powder of 00 flour coated every surface. It was on my face, in my hair. My hands were covered in a sticky, stubborn web of dough. I was trying to feed a sheet of it into the pasta machine, and it kept tearing. I was laughing, frustrated, and completely in the moment. You know, Elias said, his voice casual, I think this is it. This is what? I asked, not looking up, still fighting the dough. A mess? This, he said. He took my left hand, the one caked in flour and egg. He didn't have a ring. He hadn't planned a speech. He just looked at me, his eyes clear and steady. This is the rest of my life. I want to be in this kitchen, with you, exactly like this, forever. Will you marry me, Rowan? I stopped fighting the pasta. I looked at our hands, his, clean and warm, holding mine, which was a pale, doughy mess. I had never been offered anything so real. Yes, I said. Yes, 1,000 times. He kissed me, and the kiss tasted like flour and salt. We did not want a performance. We wanted a celebration. We set a date for the following September, a full 8 months away. I am, by nature, a planner. I believe in logistics. I wanted to give everyone time. I wanted to do it right. I designed the save the dates myself. They were thick, cream-colored cardstock, letterpressed with simple, elegant text. We spent an entire weekend handwriting the addresses. I sealed every single envelope with a stamp of dark gold wax, pressed with an R and an E. They were not just announcements. They were artifacts. They were physical proof that I was building my own family, on my own terms. They were a statement of intent. I sent one, of course, to Northcrest. A week later, I had my answer. It was a text from Delia. "Darling, what a beautiful card. So artistic. And a wedding. How lovely for you. Of course, we will be there. We wouldn't miss it." I read the text twice. It was like a check signed with disappearing ink. How lovely for you. As if it were a minor craft project I had completed. Like a well-made pot, of course. We will be there. The words were correct. But the tone was dismissive. As if she were RSVPing to a third-tier charity luncheon. It was a non-committal commitment. But, I told myself, it was a yes. I put a check mark next to Hail, Victor, and Delia, and Hail Sloan on my spreadsheet. 2 months passed. I booked a venue. A restored brick warehouse in the city, with old-growth timber beams and a wall of factory windows. I met with a caterer who specialized in farm-to-table food. Elias and I took a dancing lesson and were hopelessly, laughably bad at it. It was joyful. It was ours. Then came the email. It was from Sloan. She sent it to the entire extended family mailing list. My name, I noted, was buried in the BCC field. The subject line was, "I said yes, and you won't believe the date." My heart, which had been light and steady for months, felt a sudden cold jolt. I clicked it open. There was a photo, professionally taken, Sloan and her new fiancé, a blandly handsome finance guy, on a sailboat. She was holding up her left hand, which sported a diamond the size of a small ice cube. The text was breathless, a torrent of exclamation points and emojis. "Dearest family and friends, as you know, Chad and I have been on a whirlwind romance, and last night he popped the question. I'm still shaking. But the most magical, amazing, craziest part is when we started to talk about dates. We both, at the exact same time, said we had always dreamed of a September wedding, and when we looked at the calendar, there was only one date that felt right, that felt meant to be. September 14th. We know it's soon, but we just can't wait to start our lives together. We are so excited to celebrate with all of you in Boston. It's pure fate. September 14th. My date? I stared at the screen. My blood pressure dropped. The room tilted. This was not fate. This was not a coincidence. This was an act of aggression. This was a hostile takeover. Sloan, who had never had an original thought in her life, who had been crafted and curated by Delia since birth, would not have done this alone. This was a strategic move, planned and executed by a corporate raider in Kashmir. I waited. I knew the next phase of the operation would be a direct phone call. I did not have to wait long. My phone rang less than an hour later. It was Delia. I let it ring 3 times. I took a deep breath. I centered myself. As if I were at the pottery wheel, I answered. "Hello, Delia?" "Rowan, darling, have you seen the news?" Her voice was a symphony of feigned excitement. "Isn't it just the most wonderful, magical thing? Our Sloan, getting married, and the date, can you believe it? The exact same day as yours. It must be a sign." "It's a logistical nightmare." "Delia," I said. My voice was cold, flat. I would not play the part she had written for me. Delia's laugh was a chip of ice. "Oh, Rowan, you and your logistics, always so practical. That's what we love about you." There was a pause. The fake warmth evaporated. Her voice became crisp, efficient. the voice she used with caterers and insubordinate staff. No. Now, Rowan, we have a small situation, but it's really a wonderful opportunity. The family, of course, is overjoyed for you both, but we all agree. Sloane's wedding, it simply has to be the priority. Priority? The word felt like metal in my mouth. Yes, it's just a matter of convenience. Darling, you understand convenience. Boston is just easier. It's a hub. Chad's family is enormous, and they're all on the East Coast, and Sloane wants the grand affair. You know how she is. The hotel, the ballroom. It's a very significant event. My wedding is a significant event. Delia, I sent my save the dates 2 months ago. You said you were coming. And we wanted to, she said, her voice dripping with counterfeit sympathy. We were so looking forward to your thing, but this changes things. It's Sloane. It's family. We can't possibly ask all of these people to choose. It would be cruel. So, Victor and I have decided the family will be attending Sloane's wedding in Boston. It's simply the logical choice. Your thing. The words hung there, perfectly calculated. Sloane had a significant event. I had a thing. It's not about cruelty, Delia. It's about a commitment you made. Don't be difficult. Rowan, she snapped. The mask was off. This is what is happening. We are telling you so. You have time to make other arrangements. Honestly, it's probably a relief for you. You can move your date to the spring. Or you could even fly to Boston and have a small dinner with us the next day. A little celebration. Just for you. See? It all works out. It was a masterstroke. She had not only stolen my date, my guests, and my family, she had, in one neat, logical-sounding speech, demoted my wedding to a footnote, an optional add-on to Sloane's main event. I said nothing. My silence was a wall. Rowan? She pressed, irritation creeping in. This is for the best. You'll see. I see perfectly, Delia, I said. Thank you for clarifying the logistics of the situation. I ended the call. I sat in my sunlit kitchen, the room where Elias had proposed, and I felt the cold shadow of Northcrest fall over me, the old rage, the familiar, suffocating feeling of being erased, of being told I was clutter, washed over me. I felt the scar on my wrist begin to itch. My phone buzzed, a text message, from my father. My heart gave a stupid, painful leap. He was calling. He was going to fix this. He was going to apologize. He was going to be my father. I opened the text. Rowan, I know you spoke with Delia. This is a difficult situation, but Sloane is so excited, and her heart is set on this. You've always been the strong one. You're tough. You can handle this. Don't make a fuss. You can handle this. It was the single cruelest thing he had ever said to me. It was not a compliment. It was a life sentence. It was his absolution. My strength was his excuse. My resilience was his permission to abandon me. They were using my own field against me. Logistics, convenience, efficiency. They were using these clean, logical words as a blunt, dirty instrument to carve me out of my own life, just as my father carved the Christmas roast. The old Rowan would have cried. The old Rowan would have called him, pleading. She would have sent a long, impassioned email, full of data and timelines and arguments about fairness. She would have begged for her seat at the table. I did none of those things. I was not that girl anymore. I stood up. I walked to my office. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I did not open the email to the venue to cancel. I did not open the file for the caterer. I opened the wedding guest list spreadsheet. 200 names. They stared back at me. A long list of people, my friends from college, my old Asterline team, the women founders I had invested in, my few sane relatives, Aunt Marigold, Cousin Ray, my grandmother, and Elias's family, who had welcomed me with a simple, uncomplicated warmth I had never known. These 200 names were not a list of obligations. They were a network. They were the family I had built. They were the table I had constructed for myself. One person, one connection, one act of mutual respect at a time. I looked at the check mark next to Hale, Victor, and Delia. I thought about Delia's significant event and my thing. I thought about my father's knife. Slicing, slicing, always choosing the path of least resistance. And I decided, in that cold, quiet, sunlit moment, that I was done. I was done asking for a seat. I was done trying to be in the frame. I was done being the strong one who could handle their abuse. I would not be changing my date. I would not be making a fuss. I highlighted the row with my father's name. I highlighted Delia's. I highlighted Sloane's. I hit the delete key. A quiet manifesto formed in my mind. I would not beg a single person to come. I would not complain about Sloane's wedding. I would not even mention it. I would simply set my table. I would set it with love and care and all the logistical skill I possessed. And I would trust. I would trust that the people who were meant to be there, the people who truly saw me, would show up. The pivot had begun. I closed the spreadsheet. I opened a new browser tab. I was no longer planning a wedding in a brick warehouse. I needed a new system, a new venue, a place so far from Boston, so far from their convenience, that attendance would be a choice. A declaration. I did not just delete their names from the spreadsheet. I deleted the entire plan. The restored brick warehouse, the city caterer, the deposit on the string quartet, it was all part of a world I was trying to fit into. It was a half measure, an attempt to build my table in their backyard, close enough for them to criticize. The moment I hit delete on their names, I knew I had to delete the venue, the city, the entire premise. I needed distance, not just emotional, but geographical. I needed a place that was the polar opposite of Delia's convenience. I needed a place that required effort, a place that was, in its very DNA, a deliberate choice. I opened a tab in my browser that had been saved for months, a small digital fantasy I had bookmarked during a late night of work. It was a listing for a property rental, Convento di Fiori, a converted 17th century monastery in the green, rolling hills of Umbria, Italy. The photos were not of a sleek, modern event space. They were of thick, honey-colored stone walls, ancient terracotta roofs, and heavy wooden doors. They showed arched cloisters overlooking a valley of cypress trees and silvery green olive groves. It was not a venue, it was a sanctuary. I looked at the date. September 14th. I booked it for the entire week. Elias saw the look in my eyes. He saw the cold, clear logic. He saw the pivot. He did not ask why we were abandoning our deposits. He did not ask about the logistics. He just smiled, took my hand, and said, "Umbria it is. I'll brush up on my Italian." The flight over was 9 hours of pressurized, quiet understanding. We did not talk about Delia. We did not talk about Sloane or my father. We read. We listened to music. We were in a liminal space, flying over an ocean, leaving the old, flawed system behind. We landed in Rome and drove north for 2 hours. The landscape changed. The frantic modern energy of the city dissolved. The autostrada gave way to winding country roads, lined with impossibly tall, thin cypress trees that stood like sentinels. The hills were a deep, saturated green, a color that felt ancient. We arrived at the convento at dusk. It stood at the end of a long, gravel drive, its stone walls glowing warm in the last light. The owner, a man named Giulio, met us at the door. He was weathered, his face kind. He spoke almost no English. He just smiled, nodded, and handed me the key. It was not a key card. It was a piece of iron. It was at least 6 inches long, intricately wrought, and heavy as a paperweight. It was cold in my hand. It was an artifact, a thing that demanded intent. I put it into the massive keyhole. The mechanism was old. It required a firm, deliberate turn. The heavy door groaned, a low, resonant sound that echoed off the stone, and swung open. I stepped inside. The air was cool, almost damp. It smelled of ancient plaster, dry, crumbling stone, wild lavender, and somewhere close, rosemary. It was the smell of time itself. Giulio led us through the main building and into the central cloister. It was a perfect, quiet square, the walkways covered by a stone arcade. In the center, a simple, moss-covered well, and stretching over the entire open space was a massive, gnarled grapevine, its leaves forming a living, breathing roof. Giulio pointed up, dozens of golden filigree lanterns, the ones I had requested from a photo, were already strung between the vines, dark and waiting. "This," Elias whispered, his voice hushed, as if we were in a church. "This is where the table goes." I could see it, not 10 round tables, strategically separated, one, a single, long, impossibly long, wooden refectory table running the length of the courtyard. I walked past the cloister, through a final stone archway, and onto the main terrace. The view stopped my breath. The entire valley fell away below us. It was a tapestry of green and silver, and covering the opposite hill, as far as I could see, was the olive grove, thousands of trees, their trunks gnarled and ancient, in the low, angled light of the setting sun. Their leaves, silver green and pale on the underside, caught the breeze. They did not rustle, they shimmered. It was a soft, collective flash, as if 10,000 tiny mirrors were all turning toward the light at once. The wind sifted through them, and the sound was not a rustle. It was a quiet, dry, and constant sound. It sounded like applause. The kitchen of the convento was vast, rustic, and dominated by a fireplace so large you could stand in it. But it was cold, Giulio explained, with many gestures, that it was mostly for show. The next morning, the second part of my logistical plan arrived. Signora Livia. I had found her through a deep dive on local food blogs. She was in her late 60s, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face a beautiful roadmap of laugh lines. She was a legend in the area, a nonna who cooked for local weddings, but only if she approved of the menu. She walked into the cold, silent kitchen, clicked her tongue in disapproval, and immediately threw open the massive wooden shutters, letting in a shaft of morning light. She brought with her a crate of tomatoes so red they looked lacquered, a basket of wild porcini mushrooms, and a jug of local wine. She spoke no English. I spoke almost no Italian. We communicated in the universal language of intent. I tried to explain what I wanted. "Simple," I said, using my hands. "Vero, true. Not..." I made a gesture of fussy, elaborate plating. "Not a performance." She watched me, her dark eyes sharp. Then she grabbed a tomato from her crate. She sliced it, sprinkled it with salt, drizzled it with oil from an unmarked bottle, and handed it to me. I bit into it. It was not a tomato. It was pure sunlight, sweetness, and earth. It was the most real thing I had ever tasted. Signora Livia watched my face. A slow, broad, knowing grin spread across hers. She understood completely. She patted my arm, then turned to her 2 assistants and began rattling off a stream of rapid fire. Authoritative Italian, the kitchen, dormant for who knows how long, roared to life. The massive fireplace was lit, the air filled with the scent of garlic, sage, and burning olive wood. She was not a caterer, she was a conductor. Later that afternoon, as we tested the pasta, she said something to me. I pulled out my phone. Using a translation app. "Il cibo," she said, gesturing to the simmering pot. "È un vero invito." I typed the words. The translation appeared. "Food is a true invitation." I looked up at her. A true invitation, not an obligation, not a social contract, not a thing. My eyes stung. The sudden sharp prickle of an emotion I had locked away. She just patted my arm again, this time a little harder, as if to say, "Enough of that." She handed me a wooden spoon. "Mangia, eat." The menu we designed was an embrace. It was the antidote to Delia's cold, intimidating, status symbol dinners. We would have pizzi, the thick, hand-rolled pasta of the region, drenched in a simple, decadent butter and fresh truffle sauce. We would have bistecca grilled over the olive wood coals, smoky, elemental, and real. We would have platters of roasted vegetables from her garden, and loaves of bread baked that morning in the convento's newly stoked wood-fired oven. It was food that did not ask you to admire it. It asked you to be nourished by it. My wedding favors had arrived in a large crate. I had sourced them from the frantoio, the olive oil press, just down the hill. 200 small, dark green bottles of first cold-pressed oil, from the very trees I was looking at. I spent an entire afternoon in the courtyard, under the grapevine trellis. I sat at a small table, tying a simple, hand-lettered tag to each bottle. The tags did not say Rowan and Elias. They did not have the date. They had 3 words. For showing up? The invitations were the last piece. The opulent, letter-pressed cards from the first wedding plan were useless. They were artifacts from a different life, a different war. I drove to the local village and bought a stack of simple, beautiful, cream-colored cards, the paper thick and soft to the touch. I sat at the long wooden table that Giulio had set up for me in the courtyard, and I wrote a new, personal, handwritten note to every single person on my list. I wrote to my cousin Ray. I wrote to Aunt Marigold. I wrote to my old partners from Asterline. I wrote to the new female founders I was mentoring. I wrote to every single person who had meant something to me. Each note was different, but each one ended with the same words. We are getting married in Umbria on September 14th. It is a very long way, and we understand with all our hearts if you cannot make the journey, but we are setting our table here, in this beautiful place, and we wanted you to know that there is a seat for you. This is not just an invitation. You are not just a guest. You are seen. I sealed every envelope. I sent them. The act was done. The days that followed were the calmest of my life. I was not a stressed bride. I was a systems designer, implementing a new architecture of belonging. I did not obsess over the guest list. I did not check my phone for RSVPs. I trusted the system I had built. I spent my time on the details of the space. I spent an entire afternoon just watching the light. I saw how it moved across the courtyard, and I knew, instinctively, that the ceremony had to be at exactly 4:30, when the sun would stream through the western archway and turn the dust motes into golden sparks. That was where we would stand. I noted the way the breeze picked up at dusk. That was when we would light the lanterns. I moved the chairs for the reception, angling them not for a dance floor, but for conversation. I found the perfect quiet corner for the single acoustic guitar player we had hired. Every detail was a correction. Every choice was a quiet act of healing. Every linen napkin I folded, every lantern I checked, every chair I placed, was a counter-move to a lifetime of being cropped out, of being told I was clutter, of being handed the camera. Delia's world was built on the logistics of convenience and obligation. Mine was built on the logistics of intent. I was not hunting my guests. I was not chasing them. I was not competing with Sloane's significant event in Boston. I had taken my name out of that race entirely. I was simply setting the table. I was building a space so beautiful, so true, that it would be its own invitation. I was not building a fortress to keep people out. I was building a sanctuary. And I would wait. I would see who was willing to make the journey. I would see who would choose, of their own free will, to show up. That night, Elias and I ate bread and cheese and drank local wine on the terrace. We watched the valley sink into a deep, velvety darkness. The air was still. The night was vast and quiet, like a held breath, like a blessing. I was in the courtyard, breathing in the scent of time and ancient stone. I had sent the handwritten notes out into the world, an act of blind faith. I had set my table. I had no idea if anyone would come. I had prepared myself for a quiet wedding. Me, Elias, Signora Livia, and the olive trees. I was at peace with it. If I had learned anything, it was how to be alone. The silence from the world lasted for exactly 48 hours. Then, my phone buzzed on the stone table. A call from Vermont. My breath hitched. I saw the name. Not my father, not Delia. My cousin Ray. I answered, my voice cautious. Ray? Rowan, she said, Her voice was not hesitant or sympathetic. It was bright, fast, and full of conspiracy. "Okay, we got your note. We're booking the flights right now. Tom and I are arguing over who gets the aisle seat. The kids are shouting." I had to lean against one of the stone pillars of the cloister. It was cold against my back. "Ray, wait, what? You're coming? All of you?" "Yes, all 4 of us. We're coming to Italy." "But the date," I stammered. "You know it's the same day. You know, Boston." "Rowan," she said, and all the frantic, bright energy dropped from her voice. It was replaced by something low, hard, and deeply familiar. It was the sound of our shared childhood, of watching the same injustices from the sidelines. "We know what day it is. That is precisely why we are coming. We're done, Rowan. We are done with the command performance. We are done with the loyalty tests. We're coming to the real wedding. End of discussion." I let out a breath I'd been holding for 20 years. That call was not a single RSVP. It was the first crack in the dam. An hour later, an email landed in my inbox. The sender, Aunt Marigold, my mother's sister, a woman Delia had referred to for my entire life as difficult and a bit much. An email from her was a rare event. She preferred the telephone, but this, I sensed, was for the record. Her email was blunt, fierce, and entirely Marigold. "Rowan, I received your beautiful handwritten note. It is the first honest piece of communication I have received from your father's side of the family since 1998. I have had enough of Delia's scripted, bloodless parties to last me 3 lifetimes. I am sick of her beige-colored tyranny. I will be in Umbria. I am booking my flight this afternoon. Tell me where to stay. And tell Signora Livia I am a vegetarian." I laughed. It was a real, sharp, sudden laugh that echoed in the quiet courtyard. The pings started to accelerate. A text message from my Uncle Theo. He was my father's quiet, academic brother, a geologist who preferred the company of rocks to the messy terrain of family politics. His entire text read, "Got the card. Heard from Marigold. What day do we fly?" And then, the call I had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. My grandmother, Helen Hale, my father's mother, the matriarch. She was the one person at Northcrest who Delia could neither charm, intimidate, nor manage. "Rowan, dear," she said. Her voice was thin and reedy, crackling over the 9 time zones. "Grandma," I said, my voice soft. "You got my note. Please, please do not feel obligated. I know it's an impossibly long flight. I just wanted you to know." "Nonsense," she snapped, cutting me off with the affectionate impatience she was famous for. "I booked my ticket before I called. I'm flying into Rome on the 12th. I expect you to have a chilled glass of Orvieto waiting for me. And I am not checking a bag. At my age, I've earned the right to travel light." She paused. I heard her take a breath. "I want you to listen to me. Rowan," she said, her voice suddenly clear and strong, the voice that had raised 3 children. "Your father is a good man, but he is a weak one. He has allowed that woman to measure this family in convenience and status. That is not what a family is. That is a boardroom. That is a social club." Another pause. I just listened. "Kinship," she said, and the word landed with the weight of a judge's gavel, "is not measured by who shares your blood. It is measured by who shows up." I closed my eyes. The heavy iron key to the convento was in my other hand, and I gripped it so tightly the teeth bit into my palm. "Thank you, Grandma." "Don't thank me," she huffed. "Just be ready, and tell me, does it get cold in the evenings? I need to know if I should pack my wool shawl." My phone, which had been quiet for 2 days, began to vibrate, and it did not stop. It was too much. The texts, the emails, the calls, the questions about lodging and rental cars. It was a sudden, joyful, logistical swarm. I was in Italy. They were in Vermont, California, Florida, Texas. Ray, a natural-born project manager, took control. "This is chaos," she texted me. "I'm starting a group chat." A moment later, I was added to a new chat. The initial title was Rowan and Elias, Italian Wedding Crew. I watched as the members flooded in, my friends from Asterline, the 3 women founders I was mentoring, Elias's entire sprawling, wonderful family, my few sane relatives. About an hour in, as people were sharing flight itineraries, a message popped up from Aunt Marigold. This group name is terrible. We are not a crew. We are the truth. A beat of silence. And then, a notification at the top of my screen. Cousin Ray changed the group name to The Real Table. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the words, The Real Table. That's when the floodgates truly opened. It was a cascade. It was the sound of a system I had built, a network of real relationships, activating all at once. Ping! It was a screenshot of a flight confirmation from my college roommate, Sarah, LAX to FCO, arriving on the 13th. I cannot wait to see you marry that lovely man. Ping! A photo from Uncle Theo. He was holding up his passport, which looked brand new, next to a dusty geological hammer. The caption, Found it. Ping! A video from Elias's brother. His 2 young daughters, aged 6 and 8, were holding up a hand-drawn sign. It was covered in glitter and marker, and it said, in shaky letters, We are going to Italy. Ping, 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 booking confirmations for the agriturismos and small homestays in the village down the hill, screenshots of rental car agreements, questions about the best power adapters for Italian outlets, photos of new linen suits and floral dresses. It was a torrent of logistics, but it was the most beautiful data I had ever seen. It was the logistics of pure, unadulterated intent. It was the data of love. No one, not once, typed the name Delia. No one asked. But what about Sloane? No one mentioned Boston. The silence was unanimous. It was definitive. They understood the assignment. They understood that this was not an act of spite. This was an act of survival. They were not choosing against Sloane's wedding. They were choosing for mine. The chat became a living, breathing thing. It was warm. It was funny. It was alive. My cousin Ray, in her quest to prepare her 2 sons, aged 8 and 10, uploaded an audio file. I pressed play. I heard her son's high, piping voice, clearly reading from a sheet of paper. Scusi, dove il bagno? I heard Ray's voice in the background, muffled. Good. That was perfect. Now, may I have more gelato? The chat exploded in like reactions and laughing crying emojis. Elias's mother, a woman who had embraced me from our first meeting, replied, He will be the most popular boy in Umbria. We'll bring him a phrase book. The entire tone was set. This was not an obligation. This was not a thing. This was an adventure. I sat back, watching my phone buzz and light up on the stone table, a small, bright beacon in the quiet, ancient courtyard. I opened my laptop. I opened the original guest list spreadsheet. The column marked RSVP was still mostly gray. I had sent 186 handwritten invitations. I had braced myself for rejection. I had expected, realistically, maybe 70 people, 80, if I was lucky. It was an international flight. It was expensive. It was a choice. I started to update the file. Ray, Tom, Max, Leo, Marigold, Theo, Helen, Sarah, the Asterline 5, Elias's entire family. I went down the list, and I watched the column of pending cells, formatted in a pale, neutral gray, turn green. One by one, green, green, green. It was like watching a string of Christmas lights being plugged in, a slow, cascading wave of light and affirmation, chasing the darkness away. 152. I stopped counting. It was not about the numbers. It was about the consensus. I realized I was sitting at the very table I had imagined. It was not just wood and stone. It was this. It was this digital, vibrant network of people who were all, at this exact moment, pointing their lives, their vacation days, and their credit cards toward this one, tiny, specific spot on a hill in Italy. I was not pulling them here. I was not forcing them. The truth was its own gravitational center, and it was finally, assembling its own family. I picked up my phone. The conversation in the real table had, naturally, shifted to practicalities. Aunt Marigold, I am checking a bag. I am bringing comfortable shoes. I suggest you all do the same. These are hill towns. A message from one of the young founders I had invested in. Friendly reminder to everyone flying in. It gets surprisingly cool in the Umbrian hills at night. The temperature can drop 20 degrees. Bring a light jacket or a shawl. The group filled with good call and thanks for the tip. I smiled. Even the logistics were an act of community, an act of care. I closed my laptop. I pulled out a fresh piece of the thick, cream-colored cardstock, the same paper I had used for the invitations. I took a fountain pen, the one Elias had given me. It was time to make the seating chart. I drew one long, beautiful rectangle, the table, our table, the one that would stretch under the grapevines and the golden lanterns. I wrote Grandma Helen at one end, next to Elias's grandfather. I wrote Aunt Marigold, next to my old partner from Asterline, knowing they would find each other's blunt honesty fascinating. I put Ray's kids next to Elias's cousins. I wrote my name, and I wrote Elias, right in the middle, not at the head, in the center of the warmth. I looked at the chart. It was a beautiful, logical, balanced system. Every part had its place. Every person was connected. There was no A table. There was no dais. There was no distant, cold corner for the B-list guests. There was no family section and no friends section. And there was no privileged seating, reserved for those who had done nothing to earn it. It was just one table, the real table. I pinned the finished chart to the heavy, ancient wooden door of the convento, where everyone would see it when they arrived. The ink was dry. The plan was set. The system was stable. All that was left was for them to show up. September 14th. 10 o'clock in the morning. Boston. The Imperial Ballroom at the Four Seasons was a sea of oppressive, magnificent white. The ceilings were 20 feet high. Crystal chandeliers, dimmed to a respectful morning glow, cast a cold light on at least 300 gold Chiavari chairs. They were arranged in perfect militant rows, facing an archway suffocated in white roses and lilies, flowers so pale and perfect they looked sculpted from wax. The silence was heavier than the scent of the lilies. Delia stood near the back, a statue of champagne-colored silk. Her smile was pinned in place, a masterpiece of muscular control, but her eyes were not on the guests. They were on her phone. She was scrolling, clicking, refreshing. Her knuckles, clutching the small, diamond-encrusted phone, were white. She was not the picture of a proud mother. She was a general on a battlefield, realizing her flanks had been deserted. The front rows, the ones reserved for the Hale family, were a desolate, yawning void. White satin ribbons were strung across the aisles, sectioning off seats for people who were 5,000 miles away. A photographer, a young, earnest man with 2 cameras, approached Delia. He gestured awkwardly at the empty space. "Mrs. Hale, we have a slight issue with the composition," he whispered, all professional deference. "The A side, the bride's family side, it's very empty, for the wide shots. Do you think we could maybe move the guests from the back, condense them, or perhaps push the groom's family over to fill the center?" Delia's smile tightened. It was a terrifying sight. "Absolutely not," she hissed, her voice a sliver of ice. "My family they've been delayed. A dreadful business at the airport. They will be here. You will shoot the wedding as it is." The photographer retreated, baffled. Delia's gaze snapped back to her phone. She was staring at the family group chat. It was completely, deafeningly silent. 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Umbria. The Convento di Fiori was not silent. It was alive. The air was not cold. It was warm, honey-colored, and smelled of thyme, dry stone, and the faint, sweet scent of the grapes hanging from the trellis above. The courtyard was not empty, it was packed. 152 people were crowded into the ancient cloister. They were not sitting in quiet, obedient rows. They were standing, mingling, hugging. They were drinking Prosecco and chilled Orvieto, the glasses catching the slanted, late-afternoon sun. In the corner, the guitarist was not playing a solemn processional. He was finger-picking a soft, intricate, joyful tune that wove through the laughter. Aunt Marigold was holding court by the ancient well, already regaling Elias's uncles with a story, her voice booming. Ray's children were crouched by a pillar, trying to coax a small, brave lizard onto a twig. I stood just inside a stone archway, hidden from view. My dress was not a burden. It was a simple column of ivory linen silk that moved when I breathed. I was not alone. It is time. My grandmother, Helen Hale, said. She was standing beside me, regal in a simple, deep blue dress. She looked at me, and her eyes were not critical. They were clear. She did not hand me a fussy, wired bouquet. She reached up and, with a steady hand, broke a small sprig from the olive tree that grew against the monastery wall. It was silver green, delicate, and alive. "For the table," she said, pressing it into my hand. Elias appeared at my other side. He was not waiting for me at an altar. We were doing this together. He took my hand. His was warm and steady. "Ready?" he whispered. "I've been ready my whole life," I said. The guitarist saw us. The intricate picking shifted, swelling into the first, simple, resonant chord. The laughter and conversation in the courtyard did not stop. It changed. It softened, turning into a wave of warm, happy murmurs. We stepped out together, through the ancient stone arch, into the honeyed sunlight. 10:20 a.m., Boston. The music started, a string quartet, playing Pachelbel's canon with flawless, cold precision. The sound was thin in the vast, empty ballroom. The groom, Chad, was waiting. He looked nervous, shifting his weight. His side of the aisle was full. His family, a loud, cheerful contingent from New Jersey, looked confused. They kept glancing at the empty rows on the bride's side, whispering to each other. Delia took her place. She walked Sloane down the aisle. My father was on Sloane's other arm. A passenger. He looked gray, diminished, his eyes fixed on the back wall. Delia's chin was high. She was performing. She was the star of this production. Sloane was a vision in white. Her dress was an architectural marvel, a fortress of satin, lace, and intricate beadwork. It looked heavy. It looked, I knew, exactly how Delia had dreamed. She was holding a massive cascade of white orchids, and her hands, wrapped in white ribbon, were trembling. The dress was heavy, but not as heavy as the doubt. As she walked, her gaze flicked from side to side, scanning the empty seats. Her smile was brittle, a perfect, pale imitation of Delia's. 4:25 p.m. Umbria. As we walked to the center of the cloister, our guests parted for us, patting our shoulders, touching our arms. It was not a procession, it was an embrace. We stood before the syndico of the local village, a woman with a magnificent cloud of silver hair and a bright red sash of office. Signora Livia stood beside her, beaming, acting as an unofficial witness. The syndico began to speak in rich, flowing Italian. She smiled at us, her eyes full of warmth. Elias's cousin, who had studied in Florence, stood beside her, translating softly. "We are here," she began, her voice echoing gently off the old stones. "Not in a grand hall, but in a home, because love is not a performance." The crowd murmured in agreement. "L'amore," the sindaco said, leaning forward, as if sharing a secret. "Non si misura dal numero di persone che inviti, si misura dal numero di persone che si presentano." The translation followed, a quiet ripple. Love is not measured by the number of people you invite. It is measured by the number of people who show up. Aunt Marigold let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Elias turned to me. He had no notes. "Rowan," he said, his voice so clear it cut through all the air. "I met you when my hands were covered in clay. I was trying to build a simple cup. I was failing. You taught me how to center it. You, Rowan, you are my center. You are the architect of a life I never knew I could have. My vow is simple. I will show up, every day. For the rest of my life, I will show up for you." I did not have notes either. I spoke from memory. My memory. "Elias," I said, my voice shaking only slightly. "For a long time, my life was a table set for other people, a place I was never allowed to sit. You were the first person who ever pulled up a chair for me. But more than that, you were the one who helped me build my own. All of this. This is our table, and my vow to you is that it will always be real, it will always be honest, and it will always have a place for you." I finished. The silence that followed was full. Not empty. It was the sound of 152 people holding their breath. "Puoi baciare," the syndico said, grinning. "You may kiss." And he did. 10:35 a.m., Boston. The hired officiant was reading from a binder. His voice was a flat, professional monotone. "Do you, Sloane, take this man, Chad, to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in—" He was interrupted, not by an objection, by a vibration, a single phone, buzzing against a wooden chair, then another, and another. It was a cascade, a sudden, digital disruption in the cold, silent room. The guests on Chad's side, the ones who were also, distantly, part of the Hale extended family network, pulled out their phones, their faces changed, confusion, shock. Someone, a cousin from New Jersey, whispered, "What is this?" He was looking at the Hale family chat group, the one that had been silent for 3 days. It was no longer silent. The first photo had been posted. It was from Ray. It was a close-up, perfectly timed. Me and Elias, in the kiss. The background was unmistakable. The ancient, honey-colored stone, the brilliant Italian sun. Ping, another photo, Aunt Marigold, taking a selfie with Grandma Helen, both of them raising a glass of Prosecco, their faces split in wide, rebellious grins. Ping, a third, a video, a wide shot of the entire courtyard, 152 people, the real table, all on their feet, cheering, laughing, throwing confetti made from dried olive leaves. The whispers in the ballroom became a low, stunned roar. "Wait, is that Grandma Helen? That's Aunt Marigold, and Theo, and the cousins from Texas. Are they all in Italy? It's Rowan's wedding. It's happening right now. But they said she was—" They're all there. The realization settled over the room. They were not at the main event. They were at the overpriced, hollowed-out decoy. This entire, lavish, $1,000-a-plate affair was a lie. The officiant, flustered, tried to regain control. To have and to hold. In sickness and in health, Sloane rushed, her voice high and thin. Delia was immobile, her face a mask of pure, white fury. My father looked as if he had been struck. He was staring at his own phone, at the picture of his mother, laughing, an ocean away. You may kiss the bride," the officiant stammered, rushing to the end. Chad, oblivious and happy, turned to Sloane. He kissed her. There was a spatter of confused, obligatory applause. Sloane stood under the arch of dead white roses. She looked past her new husband. She saw the guests, whispering, holding up their phones, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. She saw the 2 entire tables at the back of the reception area, tables 60 and 61, perfectly set with china and crystal, without a single person sitting at them. The photographer, just doing his job, raised his camera. He captured the precise moment, the moment Sloane understood. She had the ballroom, she had the dress, she had the ring, and she had been utterly, completely, and publicly abandoned. She had won the battle, and in doing so, had lost the entire war. The lens caught the tears that welled, hot and sudden, in her eyes, the tears of humiliation. But she was Delia's daughter. She had been trained by the master. She did not sob. She did not collapse. She did not make a fuss. Her chin lifted, a hard, brittle, defiant gesture, a perfect, courageous, and utterly tragic performance. The camera flashed, freezing the image forever. The tears, the defiant chin, the diamond earring, and just over her shoulder, the vast, devastating, and undeniable emptiness of the room. The next morning, the convento was quiet. It was not the heavy, anxious silence of North Crest, but a new kind of quiet I was just learning. It was a peace that was full, not empty. It was the sound of the breeze moving through the olive groves, the distant chime of goat bells from the valley below, the low murmur of our friends and family, the ones who had stayed at the convento, making coffee in Senora Livia's kitchen. The courtyard, the scene of our celebration, was beautiful in the aftermath. The long single table was still there, a joyful battlefield of wine-stained napkins, half-empty glasses, and plates scraped clean of truffle pasta. The golden lanterns, their candles burned down, still hung from the grapevine trellis, their metal glinting in the sharp, clean morning light. Elias and I were sitting on the stone terrace, our feet up on the balustrade, mugs of hot, strong coffee in our hands. We were wrapped in blankets. We had watched the sunrise. "It's over," he said, his voice soft. He meant the party. "It's just beginning," I said. I meant the peace. My grandmother, already dressed, was sitting in a patch of sun, reading a book. Aunt Marigold and Uncle Theo were arguing happily at the end of the long table, trying to piece together the events of the dance party. Then, a vibration. My phone, resting on the stone, buzzed. The sound was harsh, mechanical, a violation of the analog morning. I looked at the screen. Victor Hale. My body tensed, the old, familiar, cold shot of adrenaline response. I looked at Elias. He put his mug down. He put his hand on my knee. A small, solid point of contact. "You are here. You are not there." I picked up the phone. I answered. I pressed the speaker button. The air on the terrace was so still. The sound would carry. "Hello, Dad." A burst of static. Then, a voice. Not his. "Rowan, Delia." Her voice was not the honeyed, performative coo. It was a low, ragged thing, torn apart by a night of sleepless, impotent rage. It was the gravel and acid voice I remembered from the patio, the night she had marked my arm. "Rowan, what you have done is unforgivable." I looked out at the valley. The olive trees shimmered. I kept my own voice perfectly, clinically level. "What have I done, Delia?" "You know what you've done," she spat. "You set this up. This pathetic, spiteful little show. You did this to humiliate your family. You did this to destroy Sloane's day. You smeared us, in front of everyone. I got married, Delia." My voice was a scalpel. "I set a date. I sent invitations. I built a table. People simply chose where they wanted to be. You conspired." She was almost screaming now, the restraint finally, completely gone. "You stole them. You poached our guests. You turned them against us." This was a deliberate, malicious, calculated attack. "She's paying you a lot of compliments, darling," Aunt Marigold called out from the table, not even looking up from her coffee. "This is not your business, Marigold," Delia shrieked, hearing her. "Rowan." A new voice. My father. He had taken the phone. His voice was heavy, defeated. The sound of a man trying to manage a crisis he had no tools for. "Rowan, your stepmother is. She's very upset. We are all upset. This was a terrible, terrible mess. You created an impossible situation." "I created a choice," I said. "No, you don't understand," he stammered, falling back on the one word he had. You have to see Boston. Boston was just more convenient. It was the logical choice. Sloane's event was bigger. We had commitments. It was just easier for everyone to be in Boston. Easier for who? Dad? I asked. My voice was still quiet. Easier for you? Easier for Delia? For everyone. It was. He was floundering. Victor. My grandmother's voice. She had stood up. She walked over, her face set. She held out her hand. I gave her the phone. Victor? She said. A pause. I could hear his muffled, shocked. Mother? Yes, it's your mother. I am calling you from a terrace in Umbria. It is 8 o'clock in the morning, and it is the most beautiful morning I have ever seen. I am sitting here with my granddaughter, and your sister, and your brother, and about 150 other people who, it turns out, are perfectly capable of navigating an airport for something that matters to them. Mother, this isn't... You will be silent, Victor, and you will listen to me. This is the last time I'm going to say this. You just told your daughter that her entire life should be dictated by what is convenient. Let me tell you about convenience. She took a breath. She was not angry. She was a judge, reading a final verdict. It was convenient for you to let Delia manage your life, so you let her. It was convenient to have a practical daughter who never asked for anything, so you let Delia label her that way. I watched you. Victor, I watched you at Christmas. For 20 years. I watched you buy Sloane imported dolls and cashmere sweaters. And I watched you hand Rowan a pack of gray socks and a stack of notebooks. You called it practical. You know what it was? It was an abdication. It was your permission slip to ignore her. It was convenient to let Sloane be the center of every photograph. And it was convenient to let Rowan be cropped out. To let her be the photographer. To let her be the audience for her own life. Because it was easier than standing up to your wife? I could hear, faintly, Delia screaming in the background. Grandma Helen held the phone away from her ear for a moment, as if it were something distasteful. Kinship, Victor, she continued, her voice clear and ringing in the morning air, is not calendar management. It is not logistics. It is not convenience. It is the act of showing up, and you have failed, for 30 years, to show up for your own daughter. So we did it for you. This is not a conspiracy. Victor, this is a correction. The phone was silent. Then, Delia's voice, seething, having grabbed it back. Helen, this is none of your business. This is about family honor. This is about saving face. We had commitments. We had business partners at that wedding. Rowan made us a laughingstock. We have to... Face, Grandma cut her off, her voice like Arctic ice, is not family. Delia, face is what you have when you have nothing else. You have spent your entire life polishing a performance. You have built a beautiful, hollow house, and yesterday, the walls fell down. We are done. She handed the phone back to me. I put it back on speaker. There was a long, ragged sigh. It was my father. It was the sound I had heard my entire life. The sound of his complete and total capitulation. The sound of his weakness. Rowan, please, he whispered. His voice was the voice of a very old, very tired man. I just don't want any more trouble. I closed my eyes. The sun was warm on my face. The trouble. I was the trouble. My pain was the trouble. My existence was the trouble. I took a final, deep breath of the clean, Umbrian air, and I let him go. I let it all go. I'm not the trouble. Dad, I said. My voice was calm and clear and final. The trouble was the lie. The system was flawed, and I am not living inside it anymore. I picked up the phone. I don't need an apology. I never did. I need boundaries. I paused. I let the words land. This is my boundary. Goodbye. I ended the call. I did not throw the phone. I did not smash it. I did not cry. It was not entertainment. It was not a climax. It was a clean, necessary cut. A file, closed. A ticket, resolved. The system was now stable. The silence on the terrace returned, but it was the good kind, the peaceful kind. Grandma Helen sat down, picked up her book, and took a sip of her coffee. "Well," she said, "that's that." Elias put his arm around me. I leaned my head on his shoulder. I was, for the first time in my life, at rest. My phone buzzed again. My body gave a small, involuntary jolt. Elias glanced at it. "It's not them," he said. "It's the real table." I picked it up, a notification from the group chat. The photographer, who had stayed up all night, had just dropped a link to the preview gallery. My screen lit up with the images from the night before. They were not the stiff, perfectly posed, wax museum photos of Sloane's wedding. They were alive. There was a photo of the long, single table, stretching under the glowing grapevine trellis. The golden lanterns were lit, casting a warm, intimate light, like 100 captured stars, floating just above our heads. There was a photo of Aunt Marigold and Elias's grandfather, heads thrown back, roaring with laughter. There was a photo of Ray's sons, fast asleep on a pile of cushions, their faces sticky with chocolate. There was a photo of me and Elias, not posed, but in the middle of a dance, him spinning me, my face a blur of pure, uncomplicated joy. I swiped through them, one after another. They were images of chaos, of connection, of warmth, of a table that was not just set, but used. I got up. I walked back into the main hall of the convento. The morning light was streaming through the high windows, illuminating the massive, cold stone fireplace. I found one of the small, dark green bottles of olive oil, the one I had kept for myself. The tag, in my own handwriting, was still tied around its neck, for showing up. I placed it in the center of the heavy stone mantel. It was small, and dark, and unassuming, but it was the only thing there. It was not a trophy of war. It was my quiet, solitary, victorious cup. Later that day, a small, dark thread of curiosity, the last remnant of the old system, made me open Instagram. Sloane's profile, as I knew it would be, was public. She had already posted. Of course she had. The turnaround was impressive. The photos were perfect, technically flawless, art-directed, cold. Sloane and Chad kissing under the arch of white lilies. The composition so tight you could not see the empty seats just to her left. Sloane and Chad in their first dance, a perfect, elegant swirl of satin. The background blurred into a soft, non-specific bokeh, hiding the empty tables. Sloane, with her chin held high, cutting the massive, 7-tiered cake. My father and Delia standing beside her, smiling, smiling, smiling. Every photo was a masterpiece of composition, a masterclass in strategic cropping. I read the comments. They were sparse. They were polite. Congratulations. Beautiful dress. Sloane. Just stunning. 3. So elegant. There was no chaos, no joy, no all caps screaming from cousins. No, that was the best night of my life. No inside jokes. It was the digital residue of an obligation fulfilled, a polite, hollow, public performance. My phone buzzed in my hand, a new message in the real table. It was from Uncle Theo. It was a photo of his own boot, covered in mud and what looked like red wine. The caption, "Aunt Marigold, I believe this is your fault, and I have found your other shoe." It was in the bread oven. I laughed. I locked my phone. I closed Instagram. I did not need to look again. The system had been corrected. The data was in. The truth had been verified. I was done. The peace of Umbria was not a resolution. It was a ceasefire. Elias and I returned home, to our quiet life, to the smell of clay and coffee. The waves from the wedding crash-landed, then receded. We received dozens of notes, emails, and packages from the real table. A community forged in an act of collective, joyful defiance. The wound, the one Delia and my father had inflicted, had been cauterized. But the infection remained. Autumn settled over Vermont. I watched from a distance. Sloane's social media, after the initial, perfect, sterile wedding posts, went quiet, then resumed with a determined, brittle cheerfulness. Photos of brunches in Boston, a new, overpriced handbag, a puppy. Delia, however, went dark. She was regrouping. She was a general who had lost a major battle, and she was now, I knew, reinforcing her primary stronghold, Northcrest. She was shoring up her alliances, spinning her narrative of the ungrateful, spiteful stepdaughter who had tried to ruin her sister's special day. I let the silence sit. I focused on my work. I focused on my new, real marriage. I let the system run, knowing that a system as corrupt as Delia's would eventually, inevitably, reveal its own flaws. The first crack appeared in late October. It came, as I knew it would, from my cousin Ray. Ray had, for a brief, nightmarish 3 years, served on the board of Delia's primary passion project, the Northcrest Community Relief Fund. It was the jewel in Delia's social crown, the vehicle for her performative generosity. Ray had resigned, citing bookkeeping irregularities that Delia had dismissed as charming administrative quirks. Ray called me on a Tuesday. "Rowan," she said, her voice low and tight. "I'm cleaning out my office. I found my old files from the fund. Do you remember when I told you her numbers never made sense?" "I remember," I said, pulling up a chair. "I have the statements from 2018, the spring gala. They reported $150,000 in donations, but the disbursement to the scholarship fund, it was only $90,000. I questioned it, and Delia produced an itemized expense report that was pure fantasy. Catering, administrative fees, venue rentals that were triple the going rate." "You thought she was just incompetent," I said. "I thought she was a socialite playing pretend," Ray corrected. "But now, after Umbria, I'm not so sure. There's a $60,000 hole, Rowan, and that's just one event." The old, cold, familiar click of the Asterline part of my brain engaged. The part that finds the flaw, the bottleneck, the bug. This was not a family problem. This was a data problem. "Send me the files," I said. The PDFs Ray sent were just the beginning. The system was flawed, but I needed more data points to see the architecture of the fraud. I thought back to last Christmas, the argument on the patio, the source of her rage. I had questioned her. I remembered a frantic, pale-faced young woman, an event planner Delia had hired, hovering in the doorway, looking terrified. Delia's staff turnover was legendary. I had always assumed it was because she was a difficult boss. I now realized it was a strategic purge. She left no long-term witnesses. But the world is small, and a good investigator is a system analyst for human behavior. I hired one. I didn't ask for dirt. I asked for a financial audit of Delia's public-facing life. It took him less than a week. He found the event planner. The woman had been fired 2 days after that Christmas, forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement, but the NDA, my lawyer noted, was badly written. It was designed to prevent social embarrassment, not a criminal investigation. The planner, speaking through her attorney, provided the rest of the architecture. First, the email chain. It was from the Winter Hope Gala in 2019. It was a discussion with the hotel catering department, the final bill for the ballroom, food, and staff, $48,500. Then, a second email, forwarded. It was from Delia to the fund's treasurer. "Please see the attached invoice from the hotel for $60,000. And please direct the standard $10,000 event planning and logistics fee to my consulting firm." There was an attachment. The invoice from the hotel had been doctored. The number had been changed, and D. Hale Consulting, the PI confirmed, was a shell LLC. Its only listed officer was Delia. Second, the invoice. This one was harder to find. It was from a Boston hotel, the same one Sloan had used. It was a charge for $8,200. The line item was penthouse VIP lounge, champagne service, and private catering. The client was Sloan Hale. The date was April 12, 2021. My investigator, a meticulous man, cross-referenced the date. April 12, 2021, was the day of Delia's Spring Forward Relief fundraiser, a telethon-style event meant to raise money for a local family whose farm had burned down. The $8,000 charge for Sloane's pre-bachelorette party had been submitted to the fund's accounting, the expense code, donor and venue scouting. It was a system, a clean, simple, parasitic loop. She used the charity's reputation to solicit donations, padded the expenses, and siphoned the difference into her own accounts to fund her daughter's lifestyle. But the final piece of evidence was the most chilling. The event planner had been afraid. She had started documenting everything, just to protect herself. She provided a voice memo from her phone. I pressed play. I heard the rustle of papers. Then Delia's voice. It was not the honeyed hostess. It was not the enraged shrieking from the phone call. It was the gravel and acid voice. It was cold, bored, and brutal. I do not care if the Albrechts donated $20,000, she was saying. I saw Marge Albrecht whispering about Victor at the club last week. They are not my friends. I want their names off the benefactor's plaque. Find a reason. Tell them the cutoff was the day before. Tell them their check bounced. I don't care. I will not have their names next to mine. My blood went cold. It wasn't just greed. The entire fund, the good works, the community relief, it was all a weapon. It was her personal political action committee. She used it to reward her allies and, more importantly, to punish her dissenters. And I remembered the cold slate patio at Northcrest, the smell of pine and the sharp, freezing air, Christmas Eve, last year, the root of the argument. I had seen an early copy of the auction pamphlet. I had, quietly, asked Delia why the catering estimate seemed almost double what it had been the year before. Her reaction had been nuclear. You have no right. You do nothing but criticize. It's just a question. Delia, the numbers don't add up. It is an accusation. From you. The girl who does nothing, who contributes nothing, who just shows up with her judgmental stare. I had turned to walk away. I'm not doing this. And she had grabbed me. She launched herself forward, her hand, strong from a lifetime of pruning roses and gripping her own status, closed around my left wrist. I pulled back, shocked. Her nails, filed into hard, perfect, weaponized omega shapes, dragged across the thin skin. 4 red, half-moon cuts. They beaded with blood in the cold air. I looked down, stunned into silence by the sheer, physical violation. And Victor? He was standing right there, inside the sliding glass door. He saw it all. He saw her lunge. He saw me rip my arm back. He saw me looking at the blood on my wrist. He opened the door. The sound of the polite party music spilled out. What's going on? He asked. His voice was exhausted before he had even spoken. Your daughter, Delia shrieked, instantly becoming the victim, is accusing me of stealing. I said nothing. I just looked at my father, holding my bleeding wrist, the evidence. He looked at me. He looked at Delia's face, contorted with rage, and he sighed. That terrible, world-ending sigh. The sigh of a man whose only desire in life is to not have a fuss. Let's all just calm down, he said, not moving toward me. Delia, you're under a lot of pressure. Rowan, please, don't make a big deal out of this. Let's just all go inside. Later, he had found me in the kitchen, washing the cuts. I'll talk to her, he had promised, his eyes on the floor. I'll handle it. He never did. He never said another word. The fuss was buried, but the scar remained, a faint, silvery white line on my wrist, a permanent, physical record of his abdication. I took the file to my lawyer. Elias sat with me. My lawyer, Jane, was a systems analyst, just like me. She laid the documents out on her polished mahogany desk, the bank statements, the email chains, the doctored invoices, the transcript of the audio file. This is embezzlement. Rowan, she said, her voice flat. It's wire fraud. It's a clear breach of fiduciary duty. The state attorney general will have a field day with this. There's one more thing, I said. I handed her a USB drive. The security footage from the patio. Victor's obsession with security was, ironically, his one contribution to the truth. The camera over the garage had a perfect, clear, time-stamped view of the entire patio. Jane watched the grainy footage. Delia's lunge, the grab. Me, pulling away. And assault, she said, closing the laptop. Okay, we send a cease and desist. We file the complaint with the AG. We can have her removed from the board by the end of the year. No, I said. Elias looked at me. He knew. Jane, I said, this is a system. Delia's power isn't the money. The money is just the fuel. Her power is her audience. It's the partners, the neighbors, the Albrights, the people she saves face for. If we just file this, she will spin it. She will be the victim. I will be the vindictive stepdaughter. Still angry about a wedding, she will survive. The system will reboot. So what do you propose? Jane asked. I propose we terminate the system, I said. We remove her audience. We present the data, in person, to her key stakeholders. You mean a confrontation? I mean a board meeting, I said. An unscheduled audit, in front of her donors and her beneficiaries. When? Christmas. The day of her greatest performance, the day her audience is assembled. Captive. The day my father will be standing at the head of the table, knife in hand, ready to carve. I called my grandmother. I told her everything. I told her about the Albrechts. I told her about the consulting fee. There was a long, cold silence on the line. Rowan, she said, her voice a chip of ice. Your grandfather and I set up that fund with her. I have been donating $20,000 a year, every year, for 15 years. I was told it was for scholarships for local children. I have never once seen a report. Grandma, I don't know where that money went. Well, we are going to find out, she said. Whatever you are filing, I will sign my name to it. As a co-founder and primary donor, we will have the truth. The plan was set. It was not for humiliation. It was for termination. A clean, logical, irrefutable end. I sent the text in early December. Hi, Dad. Elias and I will be in Vermont for the holidays. We will be at the house on Christmas Eve, as usual. Looking forward to it. Delia's reply, from my father's phone, was almost instantaneous. She must have been waiting for it. This white flag of my surrender. Wonderful. Darling. We are so thrilled. We have missed you. Can't wait to have the whole family together. She thought she had won. She thought the fuss was over. She thought, after my defiant wedding, that I had been brought to heel, crawling back for the sake of family. She thought the system was stable. 2 weeks before Christmas, her Instagram, which had been quiet since the wedding, roared back to life. She posted a photo. It was the front door of Northcrest, buried in an offensively perfect, symmetrical wreath of white pine, silver ribbon, and crystal berries. The caption was the final, perfect piece of data. The tree is up, the fire is lit, getting ready to welcome all our loved ones. It's been a busy, complicated year, but we are so blessed to be together. Harmony is home. Christmas Eve. Northcrest. The stage was set. Identical to the year before. Identical to every year of my memory. The silver was polished to a weapon's gleam. The crystal refracted the candlelight, scattering fragments of insincere light across the walls. The air was thick with the scent of pine and roast beef, the official perfume of our family's denial. My father, Victor Hale, stood in his assigned position at the head of the table. His hands, steady and sure, rested on the antique carving set. He was, as always, ready to perform the only ritual he truly believed in. The guests were the same, the Albrights, the business partners, the distant cousins who had chosen the winning side. But this year, the composition of the audience was different. My allies were here. Grandma Helen sat to my right, a silent, regal judge. Aunt Marigold and Uncle Theo sat opposite, watching the room with a shared, quiet intensity. Elias was beside me, his knee pressed lightly against mine under the table, a solid, grounding presence. And next to him was Jane, my lawyer, introduced to my father simply as my colleague. Delia was radiant. She believed she had won. She believed my presence, my quiet attendance, was the white flag of my surrender. She thought I had come home, broken, to rejoin the fold, to accept harmony as home. She raised her glass, her diamonds catching the light. She was in the middle of her traditional monologue, the one about her charitable endeavors. "And it has been such a challenging year for the fund," she said, her voice dripping with counterfeit humility. "The demands have never been greater, but this community, our community, has truly stepped up. The Winter Hope Gala, thanks to the hard work of our committee, was our most successful event ever. We raised nearly $200,000 for—" The guests murmured, nodding, sipping their wine. The performance was running perfectly on schedule. I waited for her to pause, to take a breath, and accept the accolades. Then, I stood up. My chair made no sound on the thick rug. I picked up my own wine glass. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to me. Delia's smile froze, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. The performance had been interrupted. "A toast," I said. My voice was calm, clear, and carried easily in the sudden vacuum. Delia's smile tightened, forcing itself to remain. "How lovely, Rowan, please." "I would like to toast," I said, "to a very complicated year, and to the people who truly showed up." I looked directly at Elias. I looked at Aunt Marigold. I looked at Grandma Helen. A silent, electric acknowledgement. The members of the real table understood. Delia's allies, the Albrights and the partners, just looked confused. The toast was ambiguous, a social misstep. I did not sit down. "Delia," I said, my voice conversational, "you were just speaking about the fund, about the gala. I was so impressed. I actually had my team look into the financials. As a systems designer, I love data." Delia's face went blank. I don't know what you mean. Rowan, darling, this is not the time for business." "You're right," I said. "It's a time for family." I reached down to the portfolio I had placed by my chair. I pulled out 3 simple, white, standard business envelopes. They were unmarked. I stepped forward, past Elias, and placed them on the pristine white linen, just to the left of her bread plate. They landed with a soft, definitive sound. "I believe these belong to you," I said. The entire table watched. My father froze, his hand still on the carving knife. Delia stared at the envelopes as if they were venomous. "Rowan, this is absurd. Stop this," she whispered, her voice a low hiss. "Open them," I said. She looked around. Her audience was watching. She had to maintain control of the narrative. She manufactured a short, tinkling laugh. "Rowan is so practical, always bringing her work home." She picked up the first envelope. She tore it open. It was the bank statement from her Shell LLC. D. Hale Consulting. It showed the transfers. Her face did not change. She opened the second. It was the side-by-side comparison. The original $48,000 catering invoice, next to the doctored $60,000 version she had submitted. Her breath hitched, just barely. She opened the third. It was the printout of the email chain, the one where she instructed the $10,000 logistics fee be paid directly to her. She looked up. Her eyes were not smiling. They were chips of ice. I slid one more thing across the table, a glossy, 4x6 photograph. The time-stamped, grainy black and white image from the garage security camera. Me, pulling my arm back. Her face a mask of rage, her hand a claw, my scar. She finally laughed. It was a real laugh, but it was brittle and high and terrible. "Oh, Rowan," she said, loud enough for the whole table. This is really beneath you, after we welcomed you back. This is, what, Photoshop? You were always so clever with computers. This is desperate. You're trying to make a scene." Mrs. Albright, our neighbor, looked relieved. Of course, it was just Photoshop. The ritual could continue. "I agree," I said. My voice was still calm. "Photographs can be faked. Invoices can be explained away. Even bank statements can be creative accounting." I reached into my pocket and placed my phone on the table. "But a voice," I said, "is much, much harder to fake." Delia's eyes widened. She knew. I pressed play. The room was dead silent. There was no music. There was only the sound of Delia's voice, filling the air. Not her hostess voice, her real voice, the cold, bored, gravelly sound of her power. "I do not care if the Albrechts donated $20,000. My phone announced to the room. "I saw Marge Albrecht whispering about Victor at the club last week. They are not my friends. I want their names off the benefactor's plaque. Find a reason. Tell them their check bounced. I don't care. I will not have their names next to mine." I pressed stop. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at Marge Albright. Her face was chalk white. Her mouth was open. The $20,000. Her check. She put her wineglass down, her hand shaking so violently it rattled against the crystal. Her husband, Dr. Albright, stared at Delia, his face a mask of dawning, clinical horror. Delia's audience was gone. A sudden sharp gust of wind rattled the French doors leading to the patio. The wind found a crack. A cold draft snaked into the warm, suffocating room, making the candle flames gutter and dance. The tiny crystal pendants on the chandelier chimed, a high, cold, dissonant sound. I looked at my father. He was still carving. Slice, slice, slice. The wet, rhythmic sound was the only sound in the room. He was trying to sever the tension, to cut the reality away, to reduce it to meat and bone. But his head was down. He was staring at the platter. He would not, could not, look up. He would not look at me. He would not look at his wife. Delia. My grandmother's voice. She did not raise it. She did not have to. She reached across the table. She laid her old, strong, wrinkled hand directly on top of Delia's, which was clenched in a white-knuckled fist on top of the photograph. Delia flinched as if she had been burned. "It stops," Grandma Helen said. Her voice was quiet, but it was the voice of a matriarch, a founder. Today, Delia was hyperventilating, her mask of composure shattering into 1,000 pieces. She looked at my father. "Victor," she hissed, "do something. Tell them. Stop her." Victor kept slicing. "Mrs. Hale?" A new voice, clean, professional, cold. Jane, my colleague, spoke. She was not looking at Delia. She was addressing the table. "My name is Jane Morrison," she said, her voice perfectly modulated. "I am an attorney with the firm of Morrison and Shaw. I am here tonight representing Rowan Hale. And, as of this morning, I am also co-counsel for Helen Hale, a primary co-founder and donor of the Northcrest Community Relief Fund." Delia stopped breathing. "We have," Jane continued, as if discussing the weather, "filed a civil complaint with the State Attorney General's office, alleging breach of fiduciary duty, wire fraud, and felony embezzlement related to the fund's finances. The documents in front of you are preliminary exhibits. We are here this evening simply to serve you notice of this complaint and to formally advise you to preserve all documents, communications, and financial records." "Embezzlement?" Dr. Albright whispered, his voice hoarse. Sloane, who had been a silent, pale ghost at the far end of the table, finally spoke. Her voice was a small, terrified squeak. "Mother?" She looked from the envelopes to her mother's contorted face, and then, finally, to me. Her eyes met mine. I had expected to see hatred. I had expected to see the rivalry, the lifetime of competition. I saw neither. I just saw a deep, profound, bone-weary exhaustion. She looked at me, and it was the first honest moment of connection we had ever had. She knew. She had always known. She had lived in the house. She had worn the clothes. She had taken the trips. She had been the beneficiary of the crime. That look of simple, tired recognition, was the thing that finally broke Delia. It was not the lawyer, it was not the evidence, it was the defection of her own daughter. She stood. It was not a civilized motion. She shoved her heavy, carved dining chair back. The legs screeched, a violent, wooden scream against the polished floor. She stood so fast her hips slammed against the edge of the table. A fork, a heavy piece of Hale family silver, jumped and clattered onto her bone china plate. The sound was a gunshot. She was on her feet, vibrating, her hands clenched, her face a mask of pure reptilian hatred. She had no audience. She had no script. She had no stage. She was just a common thief, caught. I did not stand. I did not raise my voice. I looked up at her, this small, furious, trapped woman, and I spoke the final line. My voice was as quiet and as cold as the December snow falling outside the window. I don't need an apology, Delia. I held her gaze. I need the truth, and I need an end. She opened her mouth. A sound came out, a high, strangled gasp. She looked at my father. "Victor!" she shrieked. "Stop this! Stop her! Tell them it's a lie!" Every person in the room turned to my father. He was frozen. The knife was in his right hand, the fork in his left, both poised over the roast. He looked at Delia, his wife, her face twisted in a way he could no longer deny. He looked at his mother, her face a mask of cold judgment. He looked at me. He looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time in my life, his daughter, the fuss, the trouble, the truth, the entire fragile system of his life was on a knife's edge. He had to choose, his ritual of denial, or me. He chose, slowly, with a terrible, final gravity. He lowered his hands. He placed the carving knife down on the silver platter. He placed the long, two-tined fork down beside it. The sound was almost silent, a soft, heavy, metallic thud. But in the absolute silence of that room, it was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a gavel falling. It was the sound of a door locking. It was the sound of a pharaoh's heart, weighing heavy on the scales. The carving was over. The ritual was broken. For the first time in his life, my father had stopped carving. I looked at Delia. Her mouth was still open, but the storyteller had no story left. Her narrative, the one she had used to build her entire life, to crop me out, to steal, to control, it was gone. I looked at Grandma Helen. She looked at Jane, the lawyer, and she gave one sharp, definitive nod. Proceed. I looked around the table, at the faces of the Albrights, horrified, but finally awake, at Aunt Marigold, who was, quite distinctly, smiling, at Elias, whose hand had found mine under the table, his grip strong and real. This was the table, my table, the one I had been forced to build. The performance was over. The lights were up, and the truth, finally, had taken its seat. Thank you for listening to my story. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I would love to connect and hear your thoughts. Remember to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.